So good morning. It's still morning for another 35 minutes, so I can say good morning. So I hope everybody's doing well. My name is Brandon. One thing I do during February every year, for like past 5 years, have been doing Brandon's Black Facts. And pretty much I've been sharing different information about Black History Month, and things like that. And Miss Julie was nice enough to say, hey, why don't you come share some of your facts here with you all today? And I said, cool. So we're gonna do that real quick. I'm not gonna take up too much of your time because I know you're eating. And I appreciate all of you being here today. We're just gonna like random spit out some, and if you got anything you want to add to, we're more happy to do that as well. So one thing I always like to start off with is talking about Carter Goodwin Woodson. So he was actually an African American historian, an author, a journalist, and a founder of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. He's been known as the godfather of Black history. So he was the one who's kind of started putting some things together. He started documenting a lot of the past histories, things like that, and really started putting them in a central location. He was actually born in Virginia, son of former slaves. And then Woodson actually put off schooling for a while, working the coal mines of West Virginia. And then later he obtained a PhD. And so he started, pretty much everything we see now has some inkling of starting with the roots of what he started back in the early 1900s. So we also ask a lot of times why we celebrate Black History in February. So once again, this goes back to Dr. Carter Woodson. So he pioneered the celebration that started off as a Negro History Week. Started off there, and was designated for the second week in February. Well, the second week in February actually coincides with the birthday of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. It was known as the idea of Negro History Week was a very popular one, and it started with just with breakfasts and speeches. Later becomes parts of parades and lectures. Poetry readings started happening that week, banquets, exhibits. Then in 1976, it started to become a whole month. And so we wanted to take the whole month just to celebrate those things because the week wasn't long enough. Beginning February 1, 1970, was when the U.S. presidents each year had designated Black History Month to be in February. One of my favorite quotes from Woodson has always been, it's not so much as Negro History Week as much as History Week. We should emphasize not the Negro in history, but the Negro in history. We need to do this, What we need is not a history of selected races or nations, but the history of the world void of national bias, race hatred, and religious prejudice. So he just believed that we should be talking about history as a whole and talking about the things that's happened in history and not trying to segregate or pick out what we want, but just tell the whole story. And that's one of those things I've always tried to do with my Black Facts, try to talk about what's happened in history and what was affected at the time. So actually, every year that, my notes got cut off. So the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, they make a theme every year. This year's theme is talking about African Americans and the arts. For centuries, Western intellectuals have denied or minimized our contributions to people of African descent to the arts as well as history, even as their ancestry in many genres was mimicked or stolen. The suffering of those in bondage gave birth to spirituals, the nation's first contribution to music. We've always heard of the old spirituals. Some of my favorite songs growing up was spirituals. Don't ask me to sing any of them. I'm a horrible singer. So I will give you titles, but I will not sing any of them. But we also heard, the blues music is also one of those things that can find their roots back into Black history as well. So such musicians as Muddy Waters, B.B. King, create a very natural style and sound for blues music. Become the bedrock for gospel, soul, and other popular music as well. And then we also have poets like Maya Angelou. We have different essays and autobiographies. Some of our favorite artists in the past also have been contributed. And so then we talk about the Harlem Renaissance as well. And so we can talk about the great music of Langston Hughes there, some of the poetry writings as well. And some of the music is Josephine Baker's great music, which is one of my favorites. So we have a lot of different history, and that's one thing that we really want to publicize and talk about this year. Speaking of music, we always talk about the Godfather of Soul. We always hear about that. But I actually found a fun fact about Sister Rosetta Thorpe. She was an American guitar player. She'd done blues and gospel music growing up. And in the 30s and 40s, that's when she becomes really popular. She had a technique that was not used before in music and with guitar playing. And so a lot of people had started picking up that technique, especially in England. When she did her England tour, she found out that she was very influential to a lot of the early rock and rollers, such as Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, and even Elvis Presley. So Thorpe was a pioneer of the guitar technique. She was among the first recording artists to use heavy distortion on her guitar. And it opened the way to the rise of the electric blues. Her guitar playing technique had a profound influence on the development of British blues in the 1960s. During her European tour with Muddy Waters in 1964, she made a stop in Manchester where she was there for Eric Clapton as well. So Eric Clapton got to actually sit there and witness that. So Thorpe in 1941, Thorpe officially joined a swing band where she toured throughout the early 1940s. And in 1944, she recorded Strange Things Happening Every Day. And this jazz song right here was actually one of the very first rock and roll songs that really branded her as part of rock and roll. And with the arts, we cannot talk about art without the theater and the dramatics. So Burt Williams and George Walker was two of the most sought after comedians in America. In 1903, they starred in a play called Dahomey. And Dahomey was one of the very first all-black musical comedies on Broadway. It was first to be written almost by entirely black writers, a majority Broadway house. And it followed the story of two con men from Boston who found a pot of gold and tried to devise a plan to move to Africa to colonize Dahomey with a group of poor African-American blacks. So the show moved into Broadway in 1903 and landed at the former New York Theater after its run at the Grand Opry in Stamford, Connecticut. Although the show still used blackface back then and a lot of vaudeville comedy, it was a major step in representation. And the theme of the show and the themes of some of the shows also include talking about what was going on in America at the time. So those are just two great examples of some of the art history, some of the music history we have. So every year, I always find new facts. And it's very interesting. Every year I find some things that kind of repeat itself, but then I also find things here and there that's new information. And one thing I always like to do is fact check. People send me stuff all the time, and I am a fan of always fact checking, because you never know who may ask more questions, so I gotta make sure I have the right information. But how many of us like, or used to like, or have liked hot wings, chicken wings, the hot sauce? Yes, I'm a fan of some hot wings. Not too hot, but I'm a fan of hot wings. And a lot of times we hear about the origin of the hot wing, or the buffalo sauce, particularly the buffalo sauce, comes from Buffalo, New York. Comes from this small little bar called Anchor Bar up in Buffalo, New York. But doing a little bit of digging, and one of my favorite YouTube channels, Tasting History with Max Miller, that's a shameless plug, I got to watching it and found out that the buffalo sauce actually has some origins from another sauce that was created by someone. It's called the mumbo sauce, or mambo sauce. And the origins of it actually went to court. Some people said it came from Washington, D.C. origin. Other people said it came from like a Chicago area. And so looking at both histories, I enjoy reading the origins of the Chicago history and have more details about it. And that's where we're seeing to pan out a little bit more. And so the person behind it was someone by the name of Argia Collins, who was born in 1926 in Mississippi. So it turns out he was the 12th child. Yeah, he was the 12th child. Just let that soak in for a little bit. The 12th child. Is anybody part of a set have 10 or more siblings? 17? Wow. My grandmother had 8, but
My father certainly had 13.
had 13. Okay, yeah, so, you're used to big families. Big families, there was always someone to play with, right? All right, so he was the youngest of 12. After serving in the Navy, he actually moved up north to Chicago area with his older brother. And there he actually helped run a restaurant a little bit. He done some barbershop stuff. But one thing that he did not like was the sauces for things. And so at the time, he took some of the sauces, he started blending some things, and he come up with this, what he called the mumbo sauce, which was the sweet, tangy, savory taste. I have some I've ordered. I'm waiting for it to get here so I can definitely talk about it. But reading about everything, it was definitely like the sweet, tangy taste to it. And so he started putting that on chicken wings at the time. And people were like, this is good. And so people started slowly coming back. And in the midst of all this, he actually ended up moving to Buffalo, New York with this. And he started a restaurant up there as well. And he was putting the sauce on it, and he started noticing people were coming back more and more for the sauce, for the wings. And so he was known as the guy with the buffalo sauce. And so people was just coming all over the place. And so that's how it started growing. Anchor Bar was there as well. Actually, Anchor Bar was a mile down the street from his restaurant. And so they actually have a past story as well about how buffalo sauce and buffalo wings come to there. Oh man, I got to talking too much.
It's all right.
It's all right, yeah. I just get to talking. I'm like, oh yeah, all this stuff right here. So, but I got to talking about the mumbo sauce. Yes. So the mumbo sauce moves to New York. Actually, it was John Young who was the person who moved the mumbo sauce to New York. John Young was the one in New York working on the sauce, putting it on wings, eating it. And he had the restaurant that everyone enjoyed coming to and seeing that. And John Young's restaurant was just a mile down the street from the Anchor Bar. But John Young never did get any credit for it. It's always been Anchor Bar and how they started the buffalo wings. They also have a background story. It's like 3 different versions of the story. But a lot of people credit that to that. But in 2013, the National Buffalo Wing Festival Buffalo has a National Wing Festival. In 2013, John Young's contributions was acknowledged and inducted into the festival's National Buffalo Wing Hall of Fame. So one of those things I wanted to make sure we show. We talk about, how something very small, how it moves to different areas to become a little bit bigger. Sometimes we not always get the recognition and the credit that we've helped contribute to things. And so it's a really good example of how, we've done something great, and then later on we've actually gotten the credit for it when credit was due. All right, and so I want to leave y'all with one last fact real quick, maybe 2, if time permits. I want to talk about the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl just happened. I hope your Super Bowl team won. If not, better luck next year. But the Super Bowl halftime show. We're always excited to see halftime shows in Super Bowl. Super Bowl halftime shows did not get popular until about 1993 when they had Michael Jackson as a halftime show. I remember seeing that one. I've played it multiple times since then. But the reasons why Michael Jackson showed up to the halftime show was because the year before, Super Bowls usually just had some band out there or some small show with, I think that year it was snowflakes, so snowflake dancers, things like that. And it really wasn't capturing the audience. So the show, In Living Color, decided they were going to air a live show during the halftime of the Super Bowl in 1992. And so they had the commercials and they're throwing the ads of hey, during the Super Bowl, click over to us and watch a live show. Well, they did that, and 20 million viewers left the Super Bowl show to go watch In Living Color. So Super Bowl lost, in that moment, lost 20 million viewers. And so the NFL and CBS and Fox was like, we can't be having that. No, that cannot happen again. And so when they started looking at what could we do, Michael Jackson was the biggest star and the biggest name at the time. So we're like, we gotta book Mike. And so Michael Jackson showed up and gave us that great performance. And since then, we've had well-known talent, great performances and stuff in the Super Bowl. So I always thought, I recently found that one out. Someone told me that, and of course I fact check everything. And so sure enough, I was able to read on that, and the director of the Michael Jackson show was even interviewed and said, yes, this is what happened. This is why we did it. So it was really good to hear those facts and hear the director of the show talk about it himself. So that's all I have today, but you're more than welcome to follow me on Facebook. I do have a hashtag, or I hashtag them all, called Brandon's Black Facts. That is Brandon's with an S, that is possessive. So you're more than welcome to check those out. I'll hang out for a little bit longer because someone gave me lunch. So if you have any questions or have any interesting black facts of your own that I may need to hear about, you're more than welcome. If not, enjoy your lunch, and if you're staying for bingos, enjoy bingo. Yes, ma'am.